Hi, welcome to my YouTube video on recording. This is the first of a series that I'll be doing on any facet of project studio recording. Done here at my studio in Grand Blanc, Michigan, rooftop recording. And thanks for being here. This is the very first one that I'm doing, and today we're going to be talking about miking drum sets. But before we do, just a little bit of background on who I am and why I'm making these videos. I'm an independent record producer and engineer. I've been recording since 1992 in various studios. I don't even have a count of the number of albums that I've worked on. None of that's significant. What I do have is thousands and thousands of hours of listening and experimenting and making mistakes and finding things that work and thrill me. So I want to share some of that knowledge so that hopefully you can save time in not having to make a lot of those same mistakes. And so please be sure to subscribe, comment, sign up for notifications, hit the notification bell, and let me know in the comments what kind of videos you'd like to see. What sort of topics do you feel haven't been covered as well as you'd like with other people out on the internet making recording videos, and I'll try to get to them. This is a project studio, a home-based project studio. I'm full-time recording albums for people every day. I don't do anything else for work aside from play some gigs. And what a project studio is different from another type of studio is I'm working on producing songs and working with musicians and artists for the sake of their music and art. I'm not answering to a record label or an A&R person or anybody else but the artists. So we're focused here on finding people's expression and translating that into sound for their benefit and for their listeners' benefit. So if that sounds interesting, let's see where we can go. One more important point before we move on to the drums. There's a lot of skills that are required to record. There's a lot of skills that need to be developed as an engineer. The big one, which we'll be talking about a lot, is listening. It's really crucial to develop a habit to listen to music for the subtlety of individual voices and parts within the music and how they relate to everything else. Your ears are what it's all about. A recording engineer and a producer is paid to listen and paid to have solid input on what they're hearing and what they want to hear. So that's what we'll be kind of basing everything around, and that'll be the focus of how we work. So let's listen to some drum mics. We're going to talk about drum recording, but before we can talk about recording drums, we have to talk about the drums. You can't make great sounding drum recordings if your drums don't sound great. Now, you don't have to have a super expensive kit to make them sound great, but it does have to be prepared properly. Tuning is essential. Heads are essential. Making sure that the drums are in proper repair. So if your bearing edges have damage, if you have pockets and dings on the edge of your drum, it's not going to sound good. There's just no way to make that drum sound good, and you should get it repaired. But Pearl export kit, whatever the thing may be, however inexpensive, it can still sound great. When heads get worn, they'll stop ringing. They will be impossible to tune. So make sure that your heads are relatively fresh. And one way to tell if a head is fresh, when the head is off the drum, do you have dents and dings in the head? If you do, if there's little pockets, or if it sags in the middle of the head, that head's shot. If it's still relatively flat, doesn't have any dings like this head right here, which has been used, it's fine. It'll sound fine. It'll tune fine. Yeah, a dead drum head must be replaced before you record, or it'll just never tune properly. So presuming your drum heads are okay and that your drum heads are in proper repair, we have to tune the drum. And there's two sides to a drum. Both sides need to be in tune. I'm going to pull this tom off real quick and give you a breakdown of how to tune a drum for recording. Okay, so top, bottom, both need to be in tune. And there's a lot of ways to tune a drum. Love to hear about yours in the comments. This is how I was taught. The guy that taught me how to prepare a drum set for recording was a guy named Jeff Michael at Big Sky Recording in Ann Arbor. Fabulous studio and a fabulous engineer. And he always had drum sounds that were far better than what I could get. His first answer to why that was is he said, well, you have to start by recording really great drummers. And he worked with all the best clients, and I got the midnight shift of the new up-and-comers. So there's truth to that. We'll talk about that more later, but preparation of the drums, I finally convinced him to show me how he tunes a drum for recording. And this is the general gist of it. I'm gonna knock it out to start with and show you what he showed me. So you have to muffle off one side of the drum to hear effectively this head. So I'm setting it on my leg, right on my knee. That batter side head won't ring. It's muted. If I tap with a drumstick gently around the outside of the head, you'll hear pitch variation. Low, high. Obviously, that's a low spot. And that's a high spot. Just like with a guitar, it's very hard to tune down to pitch. So anything you're doing on a drum head, you have to go lower and tune back up. I went to University of Michigan School of Music as a classical trumpet performance major, and I love talking with the other people there to pick their brain about their instruments. And one of the drummers that I went to school with once said that you can't tune a drum once it's tuned too high. You have to loosen it all the way up and start over. Not sure if I totally agree with that, but there is a good point to it. Now you can hear the pitch on this head has dropped a lot from where we started. And there are still low spots. These spots are low, the other areas are high. So I'm gonna start very slowly tightening these lugs up. A little turn makes a lot of difference in pitch. I'm listening to the end of that ring, the tail of the ring. As I tighten it, it's a good indication of how far I'm going. So drummers would call that truing the drum. Once everything is ringing evenly in pitch all the way around, which it no longer is. That's a high spot. Oh, how tight you go, how loose you leave it is really up to personal taste. There are some techniques about sometimes you tune the bottom head tighter, the batter head looser, and that'll give you a detune, doom, kind of a tom response. That's all personal, but I always want to have a head trued all the way around. High, low, wherever you like it. I don't want to hear warbles and rings from a head being out of tune. It never comes out sounding good on the mic. So we repeat the same process on the top. You can hear this drum right now I have tuned a lot lower on the batter side. Well, once we have the drums properly mic'd up, I'll show you more about that, but this drum is going to have a detune to it. I like that sound for rock and roll. I like that sound for anything where the drums are going to sound big and powerful. I like to have a little bit of a detune. Pretty true all the way around. That tom is ready to record. I do use one other trick on the toms specifically, you could do this on any drum, and there's lots of ways to muffle a drum. And one of my friends and regular session drummers showed me this, that's sort of the old variant on the old Ringo Starr technique of putting a tea towel on your drum. The towel dampens it off, you still get the impact, the bottom head still rings, but I don't want to have a dead sound from having a towel. There's no tone and no ring there at all. So instead, I use binder clips, specially prepared with gaffer's tape to avoid any rattles and rings, to attach this little towel just at the edge of the drum. Depending on how far onto the drum I attach this, how much of the towel I leave over, it's going to change the amount of ring. Really effective. It has a tendency to bounce up when you hit the drum head, so you actually get a real nice attack, and then it lays back down. And very effective ring control with nothing, no internal muffler to rattle or shake or make metallic noises. Just a towel laying on the side of the drum, and you can vary it infinitely at any point throughout a session. Works great. Okay, just a little more on the tom muffling. Here's a shot of my binder clip. You can see the gaff tape around the springs at the top. I used to have these, the little grabber springs that opened it up rattle, and I would hear it on the microphone and be driven crazy about, what is that? And that's what I found. The gaffer's tape does a good job of stopping it. And I'm just clipping it straight onto the shell and avoiding the lug. I don't want to knock it out of tune. So that's with, here's without. Little longer ring. It's a little more open and you get a little brighter attack without it, but that's okay. We have EQs, we have microphones to position to deal with that. Here's a little more. Not quite Fleetwood Mac Rumors dry, but it's pretty nice to just be able to instantly change your ring. I tend to like it not on very much, just a little bit right at the edge. Different tunings will also change how much ring control you need. Higher, lower, drums will sing out for a different amount of time. So experiment, listen. You have to trust what you hear with your ears, and sitting next to the drum itself and how that sounds just right in your ear is going to affect what the microphone hears. So start with trusting that. Same process for the one rack tom you use for the floor tom, same process for the snare, same process for the kick. You want them to be true. How tight, how loose, that's all what you want to hear. But a properly trued drum is an essential, as well as great heads. And that's pretty much it. From there, it's a matter of mics. We'll get to that next. So now we're going to start miking. Miking drums in a home environment is challenging. You probably don't have as many mics as a professional studio might have, but this whole video series is going to be geared towards people who are doing it on your own, other home studio enthusiasts, up-and-coming professionals. If you enjoy the video, it's for you, and let me know what you want to see. But we're going to start very simply. If all you have is one SM57 or one inexpensive condenser mic, what can you do? So we're going to start there. We'll go to 2 mics, 4 mics, 6 mics. We'll do my full drum miking setup. This might range over a couple of videos, but for this first one, we're going to start with one SM57 or one condenser and see what we can do. So quick note about microphones. We are doing the SM57, but I also wanted to give a couple of options. If you don't know the difference in the way a condenser microphone or a ribbon microphone or a dynamic microphone sounds, I'm going to give you all 3. This is a CAD. It's a discontinued model called the M39. It's basically the same as an M179, so it's about a $200 condenser microphone, not real expensive. and a Cascade Fathead. This one happens to have the Lundahl transformers, but Chinese-made ribbons, they're all basically the same factory. They're all extremely similar. They all have a very similar sound. They're pretty nice, and I use these a lot, but you'll hear the differences. I wanted to give you all three comparisons. So we're going to do one mic. We're going to do one of each so that you can hear how each of them might function as the single mic for a drum set. Whatever you've got, whatever you might be thinking about buying, here's some representations for you. So position number one, and a quick note, this microphone right here is what you're hearing me speak on. This is not what we're going to be using for the sound of the drums. These are my drum mics. First position, if you have just a single microphone, is kind of the traditional overhead. In this case, I'm actually going to do over the shoulder. What the drummer hears, what comes to my ears setting at the kit, is what the mic's going to get. It's a little bit taller than what I want, and it needs to point kind of at the center of the kit. So I'm just going to drop this very ancient boom down a little bit, and I'm going to angle it so that it's pointing sort of at all of the drums, pointing at the kick, pointing at the snare. It's out of my way as I'm playing. It's going to get a pretty good representation. And I prefer, if I'm doing one, to stay a little bit away from the hi-hat. Hi-hats tend to be pretty loud and cut through, and coming from the ride side of the drummer's shoulder is going to balance the hi-hat out a little better. So let's hear how it sounds. Position number one, shoulder. Okay, so we're going to do a quick first listen through to each of these tracks and see what we think of the positions. You can download all of the audio files of these clips in a Dropbox link right below in this video. That link will stay up and open. These tracks are yours to hear, to process with whatever EQ and compression you want. A little note about the recording. All of those microphones were recorded into my ISA 428 preamp. It's a very straightforward, clean, neutral preamp, very similar to anything else that you may have in an audio interface. It doesn't do a lot of coloration. There was no processing used on the way in. There's no processing used at any point in the making of this video. This is just raw microphone into preamp into audio interface. And that's what you can download and play around with and see what you like, how you would want to process it, and if any of these mic positions might be useful for you. So let's hear what we've got. This first clip was the over floor tom ride cymbal drummer's shoulder. And we'll start with just the SM57. All right, I can hear everything. An SM57 doesn't have a whole lot of low end. It's a pretty mid-range focused mic. You may want to play around with EQ on that. All right, second listen, the condenser microphone. All All right, so the condenser is a much bigger sound. It's a wider image, is what the way it sounds to my ear. Pretty quality. I can certainly work with that. Ribbon microphone, same spot. So the ribbon's always, to me, a very interesting choice for drums, especially with minimal miking. It's got a really nice combination between detail and everything going on in the top end of the cymbals and the snare drum. It's all there, but it's got more of the mid-range presence that the 57 had, but just more detail and more depth, like a condenser microphone in a way, but totally unlike a condenser microphone in sound. To me, if I was using only one of the three of these to make a record, I would go with the ribbon, because I know that it's going to accept EQ really well, it's going to accept compression really well, and work into a tone that I could manipulate. The softer section, just real briefly, same thing, 57 condenser and ribbon, and I'll just switch it through. Yeah, 57 condenser and ribbon, similar kind of impression. I like the 57 better in this case with the softer, more sensitive playing, as if I can play sensitively. The 57 actually worked to my ear maybe a little better than the condenser in this case. I think I still like the ribbon though. Just a quick word about single microphones. Back in the hi-fi era of the 50s and the early 60s, most drums would have been recorded with one microphone. A lot of classic jazz records, early R&B. One microphone on the drummer is totally normal. So it's a matter of where you put it, how you process it, if you're going to put a compressor or an equalizer on it. But very easy to get a nice phase coherent, focused drum sound because there's nothing to cancel out. It's all coming into one spot. So let's listen to some of these other positions. The next position we did, same thing over the other shoulder. Focus in on the hi-hat for listening to this. Let's see what the difference is here. Clearly, I'm not really a drummer. I'm a trumpet player and a guitarist, but there you go, there's some sounds. Let's try another position. Yeah, let me know what you think. Feel free to disagree with my assessment on this, but 57 in this position to me sounds totally unusable. That hi-hat is way too much. So the next position we had was the traditional overhead. The thing I've noticed in this position versus over the shoulder, listen especially to the kick drum. Listen especially to the low end of the kick drum. How well does it define itself within the blend of the other things? I think you'll hear a difference. Special thanks to Dave Solo, who's interning with me and helping on my video production and many other things here at the studio. He wanted to know about, well, how important is an inch or 2 or 3 in mic positioning? And the answer is extremely important, but not at all. It's really, sometimes you'll listen and it sounds terrible and you move a mic an inch or 2 or 3 and it makes all the difference in the world. But most of the times, you're not going to hear it. You're not going to hear any difference in a few inches of move. So it really comes back to trust what you hear. Trust what you listen to. Get in the habit of listening to the music that you love and keeping that in your mind. Listening to specifically, how do the drum overheads and the drums sound in music that I love? And how does this sound and what's different? Then you have to ask yourself, what are you going to change? And hopefully these videos help you figure out what to change. But position number 2, the traditional drum overhead, for me that means centered fairly well between the rack tom, the snare, really sort of in the center of the drum kit. There's debate. Some people want to have it centered on the snare because they want the snare in the center of the stereo image. And to other engineers, that doesn't mean anything. And you shouldn't keep it in the center of the stereo image anyway, because it's going to get in the way of your bass and your vocals and anything else that you want to be up the middle. So you can decide, should it be right over the snare? Should it be centered there? Should it be centered in the middle of what you're listening to? That's all up to you. In my case, I am right at the edge of the snare, kind of between that and the kick drum, because this one set of microphones has to capture all of this stuff. So where you point it, what that microphone is listening to, is totally a function of where you put it and what you want. I want everything. I want the mics in the middle of everything. Seems sensible enough, I guess. But here's example number 2, and please forgive my ham-handed amateur drumming. This is the 57. Real boxy, punchy snare sound. All the drum attacks are really clear. Here's the condenser. There's an interesting thing on the ribbon in this position that I've noticed when I've used it there as an overhead with other mics, is that there's an interesting attack on the cymbals. You can really sort of make out the stick impact on the cymbals with the ribbon as the overhead. But yeah, interesting sound out of all these. Okay, so Dave was asking me about distance positioning. The last overhead position I was about 32 inches up above the snare, and now measuring from the bass drum, I'm at about 55, 54 inches, somewhere in that range, depending on which mic capsule we're talking about. And this is the out front mic position. This is going to capture the whole kit from an audience perspective, and we're going to try it two different ways. We're going to do a high, and then we're going to move the mics down close to the floor, about 18 inches off the floor, and we'll see what difference that makes. Boy, out front of the kit, you can really hear the difference in those three microphones. All of them, to me, in this position are a little more diffused. It's not as direct of a placement. It's a little further away. It's from the opposite perspective of the drum. And the snare drum, the kick, all of it seems a little more distant. There's times musically where that might be a real advantage. The ribbon, to me, does not work as well in this particular position. I prefer the condenser or the 57 to sort of capture the overall impression of what I want out of the drums here. But it could be a little bit of EQ on the ribbon, and I may entirely change my mind, which is the beauty of having this sort of test. Is next I can go back and play around with them and try to tweak these sounds into something that would actually work in a mix, and maybe we'll do that in the future, is put these drums into a mix in different situations. But the low position is our final one. All right, so the final mic position we're going to do with the single mic setup is front of the drum kit, closer to the floor. You'll hear a big difference in sound between being up at shoulder level and down here at like kneecap level. Right straight out from the bass drum, just slightly off axis, and still about the same distance back. I don't know what the distance is from the floor, 16, 18 inches, something like that. But you'll hear the difference, and then we can all talk about it in the comments. Very interesting to me that in the louder section on the condenser microphone, the ribbon or the ride cymbal all of a sudden really jumped out. Very loud in that one part. So earlier when I was saying how a few inches here or there doesn't make any difference at all, except it makes all the difference in the world. Here we went a couple of feet lower, but a huge difference on the way the ride cymbal sounds. In this low position, that ride cymbal is not going to work for me on the condenser mic, and it didn't really work real well on the 57 or the ribbon either. So the kick drum, though, is huge. If I was doing a funky sounding R&B and hip hop track and wanted sort of vibey, breakbeat kind of lo-fi retro drum tone, this could be a great position for that. Run it through some saturation, run it through some compression. It could do some really cool things. But for most tracks, I don't think this position is going to work as well. Certainly not for a rock and roll or a singer-songwriter record. But that's a judgment you'll have to make when you hear it with everything else that you're putting together. So I think that just about wraps up the amount of time we should do for one of these videos here. So we're going to go into multiple mics, 2 mics, 4 mics, 6 mics on the follow-up part 2 of this particular video, and look for that soon. But, you know, the takeaway for me from listening back to all of these clips is there's a lot of ways that a single microphone can work. Could be that if one position is not right for a track, you come back and think about what you heard in these different positions, move the mic, try it in a new spot, and don't let a single microphone being your only way to capture the drum set stop you. Go ahead, make that recording and learn from it. Listen to what you get, try different things, and the key is to listen and knowing what to listen for. And I think when it comes to a drum set, what you really want to listen to is, can you hear each of the elements? Does this player's technique translate to where I have the microphone today? Don't get stuck in any one thing as this is best. Listen to what your player and your music is asking for. If it's a softer track and you need that brighter sound and you have a 57 and you have an inexpensive condenser but you only have one input, listen to what works best in your piece of music this time. And ask yourself critically with that sort of ear and that sort of thought process of, is this serving the music? And if not, try the other options that you've got. And have fun recording. I'll see you on the next video.